So we'll make it available to all of you and anyone who's missed the meeting by putting it online by the end of the week. So it looks like a few folks are still joining us, but I think we are all set. So let me just, we're going to give you a quick presentation. All right, everybody can see the screen? Great. All right, so I'm Anya Gran with the Chapel Hill Planning Department. Tonight we are having a public information meeting on short-term rentals or STRs. A little bit about our agenda for the meeting tonight. So Anita Badrock is going to review the ground rules for the public information meeting and how the public can participate. I'm going to give you an overview of the draft ordinance that we've shared both via email as well as online on the project webpage. And then we're asking for community feedback specific to the provisions of the draft ordinance. So the purpose of this public information meeting is to summarize the proposed short-term rental ordinance, receive feedback, and then we are going to be receiving your questions, and we will provide a question and answer handout online no later than this Friday. So with that, let me turn it over to Anita.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Anita Badrock, and I'm one of the town ombuds here at the town of Chapel Hill. And I wanted to take just a moment to talk a little bit about this meeting and sort of the shared agreements that we want this meeting to use as we discuss the draft ordinance. The first one is that this is a public discussion, not a debate. The staff is interested in hearing your thoughts about the ordinance, not necessarily your thoughts about each other's thoughts. So it's not, the purpose is not to persuade other people or to win an argument. We want to hear many points of view tonight. Everyone is encouraged to participate. So we might ask you to share what you think, or we may ask for comments from those who haven't spoken. If we do call on you, it is always okay to say pass or to say I don't have anything more to add when you're asked to share a comment. Everyone's perspective is valuable, so we're going to ask that if you have already shared, that you allow space for others to share their thoughts before you share again. And please be brief and to the point. When you speak, if you'd state your name and generally where you live in the town, in a public meeting, it's sometimes helpful to know what areas of the community people live in. We're not asking you to share a specific address. We are also asking that one person speak at a time and share your comments with the entire group. And we're asking you to refrain from side conversations. The chat is open and we will be monitoring the chat for comments and questions. And those chat comments can either be sent to everyone or sent to the hosts. If you think you're going to forget something, please write it down and that'll be available to you when you're ready to share. And then we're going to ask you to please seek to understand rather than just to be understood. We want to ask questions to seek clarification when you don't understand something about the ordinance or something that someone has said. Want to ask if those are okay. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that before we get started? Great, thank you.
All right, so here's where we are in this process and where we are going. For those of you that are just joining us, this process began in June of 2019 when the council directed staff to develop a short-term rental ordinance. The council then appointed the short-term rental or STR task force, and that task force met from October of 2019 through February of 2019, and they discussed the different aspects of dedicated short-term rentals, and we'll talk a minute about what dedicated short-term rentals are. The task force then provided a final set of findings for the council to consider in February of 2020. Staff has continued to meet with the town council to receive their input on different ordinance provisions, and that's occurred from March of 2020, so prior to the start of the pandemic all the way through this year. And then staff will be taking the draft ordinance to the Planning Commission for recommendation to the Town Council on May 4th. And then we are meeting with the council at a public hearing to receive their feedback in May with possible action in June. And throughout this process, the community has offered input both at all the task force hearings. You've emailed staff and made us aware, and then you've also provided input to the town council, and we appreciate that. So over the last few months, this is the input that we have received from the town council, and this is all summarized. They have told us that they believe short-term rentals are a lodging use that should be regulated to protect neighborhood character. We had initially talked about separating the different types of rentals into hosted, unhosted, and dedicated short-term rentals. And they've told us to group the hosted and unhosted rentals together. And we've created a definition for this called primary residential rentals. They thought dedicated short-term rentals, or STR, should be its own category. They also found that dedicated STR should not be a permitted use in residential neighborhoods, but that they may be appropriate in non-residential zones, like those that allow for mixed use or commercial development. And throughout this whole process, there has been an interest in safety standards. So these are the different types of short-term rentals. And I know these terms have been flying around a lot over the past 2 years. And so the first one we want to talk about is the primary residence short-term rental. And under this umbrella would be the terms that we've used in the past for hosted and unhosted STR. So the hosted STR is when the primary resident is on site with the guests. It might be the nightly rental of a spare bedroom or an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, but the idea is that the resident is on site. The unhosted STR is when that resident is not on site with guests. So an example of this might be, the couple that rents out their house while they go on vacation a couple times a year. This can be the nightly rental of a principal dwelling unit or the ADU or accessory dwelling unit that's on the same lot as the resident occupied dwelling. And then finally, it's the dedicated STRs when there is no resident on site. These buildings are used only for short-term rental. And I would want to stress that we are permitting accessory dwelling units or ADUs to be used as STRs. Under these definitions, the ADU is only considered a dedicated short-term rental if it's part of a larger site where there is no residence. And so if you live on site and you're renting your ADU out, then it's a primary residence STR. So based on the feedback we've received and what we've added to the draft ordinance is that the primary residence STRs would be allowed in all zoning districts that permit residential uses, and that the dedicated STR would be permitted in those non-residential areas that generally permit mixed use and commercial areas. Here are our proposed definitions. So the first one is, what is a primary residence? This would be the dwelling unit or a dwelling unit with an accessory apartment that's on a property in which the host resides there the majority of the year. And we've set this as a 60% or more of the year, which equates to about 219 days. So the primary residence short-term rental would be the rental of a primary residence that is rented wholly, so the whole unit or partially, such as like a bedroom. And this would be rented for a fee to transients or guests for fewer than 30 consecutive days. And again, this term is the umbrella term for both the hosted STR and the unhosted STR that we've used in the past. And under this scenario, or under what we're proposing, we would not allow you to have a simultaneous rental contract when the host is not on site. So, if you are living in a house that has an ADU and you typically, rent out bedrooms in your house and maybe the ADU while you're on the site and at home with the guests, that is fine. But if you go on vacation, we don't want you renting out your house separately from the ADU. And then the final term here is the dedicated short-term rental. So again, this is the rental of a residential dwelling unit on a property that is not used as a primary residence and is rented in its entirety to one party of transient guests at a time for fewer than 30 consecutive days. And in this case too, we're saying no simultaneous rental contracts. So the operational requirements that we've outlined in the draft ordinance include all of these. The maximum overnight occupancy would be 2 guests per bedroom plus 4 guests, excluding children under 12 years of age. And this came out of the findings from the short-term rental task force. We're requiring that there is a designated responsible party that can respond to any emergencies on site within 2 hours. This use, as well as any other use, does have to comply with the noise ordinance. We're requiring as well that the dates of trash pickup and any necessary instructions are available in the unit to the guests. There should be adequate on-site parking. No signs advertising the use of the property as an STR will be permitted. The short-term rental operator is responsible for paying occupancy taxes if it is not already collected by the hosting platforms. And we've talked about that in the past as well, that Airbnb and others collect the occupancy tax for hosts. In some cases, the hosting platform may not, and that's when the short-term rental operator is responsible for paying those occupancy taxes to the city. There would also be a minimum rental age of 21 years or older, and then a minimum rental duration of not less than overnight. We would not allow special events such as weddings, receptions, and other large gatherings at the short-term rental. The operator would be required to apply for and receive an annual STR permit. And at the time of that permit, staff will notice the adjacent property owners within 100 feet of the property that the site is going to be used as a short-term rental. And then we've talked a lot about safety standards, and the building and fire codes do not allow us to go in and inspect residential uses for safety. And so instead, we have said that this is something that we will put into the application and require of short-term rental operators. And so finally, if you receive 3 violations related to the STR use within a rolling 12-month period, the town will have the right to revoke your short-term rental permit. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Anita.
Sure. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We're really glad that you're here. Jim Hugerich, who is my colleague and the senior ombuds for the town of Chapel Hill, is going to be facilitating our conversation here and facilitating your comments and public input. Once again, we just wanted to remind folks about the shared agreements. Also, some people call them ground rules of how we want this information session and your input to go today. So thank you so very much. And I will turn this time over to Jim.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you everybody for being here this evening. As you'll note, this is a lengthy process. This wasn't something decided a month ago. It's been going on for a couple of years. It's going to be, we want to get it right. And the way the town gets this right is via your input. And so we welcome your questions. We will not, staff will not be responding to questions tonight. We're going to gather as many questions as we can. And then we will post the questions and answers on the town website. That allows us in this short period of another 45 minutes to be able to get as many questions as possible. This is not your last opportunity to give input. You can always contact Anya. You can always contact, there's other planning staff here. Judy and Colleen are here. So we're here to hear what you've got to say. Again, following the shared agreements. So you have other opportunities to do that. So let's just open it up now for your questions. Again, all we're going to be doing is recording your questions and look for, we're going to ask you that if when you speak that you limit it to 2 minutes. And meanwhile, Anita's going to be monitoring the chat. If you've got questions in the chat, we'll capture that. Also a reminder, this is being recorded. And so we will capture everything to be able to share with council.
And before we get started, I just want to tell you that I'll give you, like, I don't know if you can see this. Oh, goodness. I'll give you a little wave at 2 minutes. So for those of you who can see me, I'll give you a little time reminder. And thanks again for being here this evening. Thanks.
So we're opening up the floor, please.
And you can use the raise hand feature, or you can just raise your hand on the screen and we'll call on you. Or yes. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yes, Eric Plow, I saw your hand raised, so please speak.
I'll keep this under 2 minutes. I've done short-term rentals for 20 years in a residential area surrounded by apartment rentals, mostly occupied by students. They're the problem, not me. I don't disturb anyone. I don't affect the character of the neighborhood. I don't affect property values. My situation is completely different than operating a dedicated STR in a single-family neighborhood. In fairness, I would request that the town not adopt a one-size-fits-all strategy and that accommodations be made for anyone in my particular situation. I understand the town ordinances override HOA covenants, but HOA covenants are legal contracts made with its owners. The town should consider not overriding existing contracts which were deemed appropriate for the community within which they were drawn up. I would therefore earnestly request that any newly enacted ordinance respect existing HOA declarations and covenants on record. This would enable me to continue what I've done for the past 20 years with no problems. Now, the town could certainly require future HOA declarations and covenants or modifications thereof to comply with any new ordinance. But I'd like to see the town respect what's already been deemed appropriate for existing HOAs. Now, just real quickly, I've addressed a lot of the red herrings that have been raised in previous emails, but of the 1,500 noise and disturbance complaints that the call center received, the 911 call center received over a one-year period, only 3 have been documented emanating from short-term rentals. In the case of a problem, short-term rental tenants will be gone in a few days. It takes weeks to evict a problematic long-term tenant. Airbnb has double-blind reviews, meaning that hosts review guests and guests review hosts. Reviews are posted online, and this assures that problematic hosts and visitors are quickly blacklisted. Also, Airbnb and VRBO collect occupancy taxes and remit them directly to the town. The town repeatedly states that it wants tourism to support the many businesses that benefit from tourist dollars. Many individuals, particularly families, have told me many times that they only go to Airbnbs. If Airbnbs are not available in Chapel Hill, those tourist dollars will be spent in the nearby town. Visitors in Chapel Hill should have a choice. What do you think the reaction would be if the town eliminated or limited the number of Uber drivers operating in Chapel Hill? How'd you like that?
Eric, I'm going to have to ask you to close this off so we can get other views.
20 more seconds.
Well, would you be willing to submit something in writing to what you're sharing with? Can you submit that to town staff so we've got everything and don't lose any of your words?
Absolutely.
So why don't you do that, Eric? Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks.
Catherine Schultz, I see your hand up.
Hey there. Yes, hi. I am actually outside of Chapel Hill. I am in Orange County off Damascus Church Road. But I've never been aware of an STR permit. Is that something that I need to submit?
Okay, thank you for that question. So we will make sure we post the answer to that question on the town website. Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question, which is, are you in the city limits of Chapel Hill?
I'm not.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be sure I've got accurate information for the questions. Thanks.
But Airbnb is, I'm on Airbnb and they are paying the taxes to you guys.
Thank you.
And that's an important question, Catherine. I think it's an important qualification too, or clarification, Anita, because there'll be folks that'll be looking at these questions and answers that were not here this evening, and for us to be able to truly dig deeply and answer them properly, it's important to have.
Jim, there's a question in the chat from Katie Luvis. Would you please say a bit more about enforcement? How should a resident proceed if a neighbor is operating an unpermitted dedicated STR in a residential zone? And Katie, we will take that question back and make sure that that's part of the question and answers that we'll research and provide more information on. I just want to let you know we got that.
Benjamin Warshaw.
Hi there. So I first want to acknowledge that the bulk of the draft ordinance and requiring licensing and trying to ensure public safety, striking a balance with hosts and other neighbors seems pretty solid. And I know that there's a ton of work that's gone into this. So thanks to the town staff for doing all this. But I want to talk to a couple of items here that seem overly restrictive and treating STRs unfairly. So the first ones are 4.9.8 D and E, where we're not allowed to potentially rent the primary residence while renting the ADU. I'm not sure what the purpose of this would be, but if we have a primary residence where we are licensed and operating as an STR, it seems reasonable to be able to rent our primary residence on a temporary basis, even while the ADU is rented, as long as we had a local designated responsible party and we're following with all the other regulations. So I'm not sure why that got in here. I never heard it talked about during the task force. It seems new and unreasonable. The next one is 6.27.1.b, which is the designated responsible party would need to respond to on-site in an emergency in 2 hours. I understand possibly the intent behind this, but it seems impractical and an unfair burden on hosts. Even just going to the grocery store, it could end up being in a situation where we can't make it back to the site in time. So I would say we want to rely on our emergency workers and police. If there is an emergency, that they should be first responding to the site. And as long as the designated responsible party were available by phone or text within 2 hours and responding to it that way, that seems that there's a little bit more flexibility, especially if we have to go out of town on business. Even though we're the DRP, we would want to respond and possibly send a proxy to the site, as had been discussed during task force meetings, but not personally be responsible for being on the site within 2 hours. That's just an unfair burden. The next one, 6.27.1.d, trash and recycling disposal being posted. We handle the trash for our guests. We bring it up to the curb. Our house is far away from the curb and we're up on Smith Level Road. So it's a weekly pickup. We don't want to have to post things that are unnecessary for our guests. So it seems like this could be handled either by posting in the house rules on the short-term rental platform or directly with our guests as necessary. 6.27.2.b, minimum age of 21 years feels too high. We rent to a lot of college age students who are visiting friends at UNC, and folks who are over the age of 18 are responsible enough. If they can, they should be able to vote. They're responsible members of society. I feel like they should be able to rent a short-term rental and visit their friends in town.
And Benjamin, can I ask you, we're over time on 2 minutes. Can I ask you to put in writing and send to Anya so that we can incorporate all your questions, really, because I really like the specificity of what you're referencing. And if we could have that in writing, it'd be very good.
I will do. Can I just bring up one quick one? I'm sorry I'm over time, but the last one is the no special events rule. And this feels very important because it is treating STRs differently from other rentals or just primary residences. We have parents who are coming to visit their students and having them over to stay for dinner and hanging out. Doing a broad stroke, you can't have any events at an STR seems really egregious when we're not making the same restrictions for mid or long-term rentals or for student housing.
Thank you, Benjamin.
I'll send all this to Anya and over email though too.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.
Thanks.
And I just want to let you all know that chime you're hearing is the 2-minute chime. I don't know if you've been able to hear that, but
I couldn't hear a chime, by the way.
Okay. Okay, then I'll just continue to wave. Thanks.
Edmund Burke. You're muted, Edmund. Edmund, you're still muted.
Okay, how about now?
Yes, very good.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up. I've written a letter, a couple of them, to town council and to the planning commission on a couple of things, and I just want to repeat them here. Item 6.27.1 about maximum overnight occupancy. I recommend the capacity loading feature of, excuse me, 4 extra people. I think you run the risk of codifying a party house by adding the 4 factor. And I attended some of those STR planning meetings, in fact, all of them, and there were differences of opinion. I didn't consider that a consensus. The reason, let's do some math. In a 1-bedroom apartment, you're saying 6 people can stay there. That's a party house. In a 2-bedroom house, that's 8 people. In a 3, that's 12. Think about the nature of STRs in Chapel Hill. They're rather celebratory. Football games, basketball games, graduations, weddings, funerals, business conferences, civic conferences. Most of the STRs, I would be willing to bet, are celebratory. And quite frankly, there is a party house problem, an epidemic in this country. I'll quote the article from October of last year in the New York Times, the article from the Wall Street Journal in December. There were 27 shootings in Airbnb party houses in a 6-month period last year. There were 5 murders. In the Wall Street Journal article, 5 neighboring houses to an innocent little looking STR rental received incoming gunfire. Now you think about that. 5 houses in your neighborhood receive incoming gunfire. Now I recommended some gun safety recommendations and was told both by the mayor and by Verla Ensko, whom I wrote, sorry, Raleigh has control over all gun regulations. We can't pass our own ordinances. So-
Edmund, I'm gonna have to cut you off, Edmund. Is it, if you have additional, can you submit that in writing to town staff?
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'd like to say
Oh,
something.
yes, Hannah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that, this past year due to COVID, I've seen a lot of people do short-term rentals, travel nurses who come here for 30 days to help our community, making sure that they get assistance. These are individuals that are coming into our community for people. They're trying to save money. They rent out a place. It's not the type of people that are trying to disturb, but really help our community. Also, medical residents. There are a lot of medical residents who really can't afford exorbitant fees, can't afford to bring all their furniture down to Chapel Hill to be at UNC or Duke, and need these short-term rentals and need a place that is affordable for them. Remember, when you were in your early 20s, could you really afford an expensive place? So I just wanted you to take into consideration, we do short-term rentals probably to also individuals who are trying to support our community and can't really afford a big fee. Thank you.
Hannah, thanks for sharing that. Any other hands raised here? I think Jeremy can.
Hey, sorry, I meant to raise my hand. I was looking for the hand raising button. Sorry about that.
Please go ahead.
Well,
Thank you.
Sure. Just to say, speak in support of everything that Hannah just said. I absolutely agree. The vast majority of the people who stay at my short-term rental, and I'm not clear actually on the definition of a short-term rental under the proposed guidelines, but the vast majority are medical residents, travel nurses who are helping out with this, public health emergency. They can't be sharing a house with a host. It would be, for some of the cases, it's contractual. They can't be sharing a house with, a random person like this. They need a place all to themselves. I can't be an on-site host for them. Medical residents, visiting scholars who are doing research at the local university who want to live in a home. They don't want to pay $150 a night for a hotel, right? I think that's part of making Chapel Hill a friendly, helpful community for these people that I think we can all agree we want those people here. A second point, I think that housing is expensive across the country. And for a lot of people, including myself, being a grad student at UNC in the past, I've thankfully finished, that was a ticket to homeownership for me, was being able to rent out bedrooms. And I found that Airbnb prevented me from having really distracting roommates, people who were making a ruckus, people who I had problems with. Things like that, having the ability to have a short-term rental was very helpful. Quiet tenants who are required to be quiet or they get a bad review essentially. I think that's also a ticket possibly to homeownership for many of our Black and Brown residents in Chapel Hill. And we want to promote homeownership. And this is an inventive entrepreneurial way to ensure homeownership. I think many HOAs already, many HOAs already oversee, make sure there's no noise, things like that. I think it was Eric Plow, who mentioned, 1,500 noise complaints versus 3 for Airbnbs. I think this seems like sort of not legislation, but, this seems possibly a case where there's a bit of an overreach here by the town, solving a problem that doesn't yet exist. I understand the need for preventative regulation. Just because nobody's died yet or nobody's died in a house fire yet, et cetera, doesn't mean it won't happen. But I think that we need to be reasonable here. And one thing in particular was the idea that STRs only being allowed in commercial or mixed use areas might be an unreasonable restriction, given the fact that that would probably make effectively illegal many of the short-term rentals that currently exist in Chapel Hill.
Jeremy, thank you for your thoughts. Lori, did you have a hand up or was I mistaken on that?
No, I did. Sorry, I had my phone on as well. I just want to understand a little bit more how the 3-strike rule is going to be in effect. It does seem a little arbitrary. I don't know how that would affect if you're going to send out a notice to every neighbor within 100 feet. I live next to a couple of rowdy college students, and I think that I would say that most days that they bother me, but I don't call the town and complain about them. I think that there should be some understanding. And also, I think the review process should be done within Airbnb and Vibro. If you have 5-star reviews and you are conscious to your neighbors and you only rent to those who are using it for good use, I mean, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with what these are being used for. I've locally rented to a person whose child was having a heart surgery at UNC. It's not a party house. I don't want to be a party house. I live there on the opposite days that it's being rented out. And I think there should be understanding. I have respect for my neighbors and I would want them to have respect for me. But if you have a 3-strike rule, who's going to determine that, and where's the legality with who's making these decisions? I mean, if my neighbor decides that they don't want to do it and they call 3 times and complain about me or someone else, that seems a little bit overstepping. And I just think there should be a more understanding process and review by just taking the neighbor's opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Who else has something they want to ask or share? Bib? Thank you.
Hi. I have a situation where the furnished rentals that I have available are a mixed use. We have some of them that are annual, some of them that are month to month, a lot of visiting nurses, a lot of residents, people coming for a semester. But then we have gaps. There might be 5 days when nobody's there. And the ability to take in a short-term rental makes the difference between being able to pay the mortgage and pay the taxes. So how does this mixed use kind of thing fit in?
Thank you for that question, because I think that is something that needs to be addressed, the mixed use. Other questions, folks? I'm having to jump back and forth between 2 screens to make sure I see hands.
Has a decision been made? Or, are you really going to take these anecdotal examples to the powers that be?
We will share everything that you're sharing with us, both here and prior to this, in between now and when it goes to council. We'll share everything with council. A decision has not been made. And in fact, that's why it's taken as long as it has, is once we hear things from the community, share it with council, then council has additional questions to take back to the community or suggestions to take back to the community. So it's been a journey, but I think that's a great question, Hannah. We value, as I had said initially, we want to get this right. And getting it right is probably not a one-time decision either. What council decides ultimately will be tweaked, I would assume, as we go along and learn things.
I see Catherine Schultz's hand up. She has the hand up on the feature.
Catherine?
Yes. Yes,
Please.
hi. We all know getting things right is so very hard, and I thank you for inviting us all to contribute to this. My question is, are these rules, not rules, but this proposal right now only limited to Chapel Hill city limits? That's a yes or no question, so I don't think I should have to wait.
Jim, I can answer.
Okay, Judy, please.
These rules would be part of our land use management ordinance, which is, does cover the town's planning jurisdiction. So if you're within Chapel Hill's planning jurisdiction, which would extend outside of the city limits, basically to the north and south of Chapel Hill city limits.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Judy. What other questions do we have?
I had a question, if I may. I just want to be clear on the difference between short-term rentals and what is not considered a non-short-term rental. Even when I do leases longer than 30 days, I often use Airbnb because, as I think somebody else mentioned, it's extremely difficult to evict a problem tenant in Chapel Hill. I had somebody setting fires and stabbing people and things like that, and I still couldn't get them evicted. So Airbnb provides, support in that. And I'm just wondering, is that, Airbnb would have been much better in that instance, for example. So what is short-term rental versus non-short-term rental?
Thank you for that question, Jeremy.
I had a question.
Yes, Mary, please.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. Is there going to be any limits placed on how many nights per year that you're allowed to rent, or a percentage, or how many nights you're going to be allowed to rent in any of these situations, in any of these categories?
So the number of nights or a percentage
Yes.
is what you're asking.
Yes.
Thank you for that question.
Mhm.
I have another question, please.
Yes, Edmund.
In the hosted, in the residential area, let's see, you use the term general use zoning districts. Are there any limitations as to the number of STR hosted homes that are allowed, for instance, I'll pick a number, in an R3 district, or is it wide open? And is the town more or less in these residential areas wide open? STRs, as many as you want, as long as you obey the law, follow the ordinances. Anybody can move in next door and open up an STR. Is that correct? Do I understand that?
We will make sure that you have an answer and that it's posted on the website. Thank you for that
so
question.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm trying to monitor if people have their hands up or you're using the raise hand feature of chat, but you can also just unmute yourself too if you have some thoughts or some suggestions about the ordinance.
I guess I could add, to me, this feels like kind of a giveaway to large companies that already kind of overexploit students, grad students, visiting medical students, that sort of thing. They need something like an Airbnb to stay at. It is the most reasonable accommodation for them. And by limiting that in our community, we will make it much more difficult for those people. If you try to get a lease at these large rental companies, they're going to ask you to sign up for a year, pay an exorbitant rate to break your lease. They have lawyers, on call to back that stuff up. I think that Airbnbs are actually a key part and fabric of the community for making sure for years now that these, visiting travel nurses, visiting scholars have a reasonable place to stay, visit, and live.
Thank you, Jeremy. Other folks. We want to spend about another 5 minutes in getting input and then kind of wrapping up and letting folks know what's next. So yes, Bib, go ahead.
Excuse me. I just wanted to come in support of what Jeremy just said. We get an international group of people coming for the medical school, for the university. Most of them really are not well set up to be able to make longer term leases, and certainly not to stay in hotels. And I think the kinds of spaces that short-term rental, medium-term rentals, and long-term rentals for furnished rentals, there's a shortage of furnished rentals in this town.
Thank you.
Sally Pershing? Yeah, Sally.
Yes, Sally, please.
Hi. I agree with most of what was said here. We don't do short-term rental. We do home sharing. We live here and we have a couple of rooms and an extra bathroom, and that's people. So people are actually, we're here all the time. So our situation is a little bit different. But the thing that in listening to all this, I was on the task force and we talked about all this and we hashed it out and we wrote it up. Is that all just being ignored? Has the council looked at what we said and considered it? I'm kind of confused. I missed the first couple of minutes of the meeting, so I might have there might have been information there, but you know, a lot of people are saying exactly the same things that we said in the task force meetings.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure other folks share that same concern. What's happened with input we've given up to now? How is it factored into decisions to where we're at now? And we will make sure that we address that on the website. So thank you, Sally. Yes, Eric.
Real quickly, I'd like to just tell you the families that I currently have renting in my short-term rentals. Number one is a firefighter. Number two is a family with a young girl, daughter. Another one is a Chinese couple that's here for 2 months. They're great tenants. Another one is rented to a family with 2 young children. And the last one is rented to a traveling laboratory technician that works at UNC hospitals doing COVID testing. None of them are causing any problems.
Thank you, Eric. That helps put a face to what we're talking about. Thank you.
I have one tiny last comment, which I think Eric agreed with me in the chat window, which is in terms of the actual ordinance, I think there should be a potential for some sort of grandfather clause, subject to, inspections for people who have not had issues, who have rented their unit short-term rental for years without any issue with the Airbnb tenants or, furnished finder residents, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Jeremy. Other thoughts? Yes, Trey, please. You're muted.
All right.
Thank you.
Nope. My reason for being here is not because I have a short-term rental property, but there is one in the neighborhood and I'm concerned about its use. I don't think anybody really has an issue with quiet people or professionals. A lot of discussion is going towards that, but my perspective is more when there are too many automobiles or occupants for a property and there's parking in no parking zones, cars parked on the grass. What is the avenue for policing that? I hate to use the word police, but I don't know how that's going to be enforced. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for that. What you're asking for, Trey, if I understand properly, is how do we make sure that folks are held accountable to the stipulations set forth in the STR?
Well, the property I'm speaking of is in a residential area and it is not owner occupied at all. It is strictly an STR.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other thoughts?
Jim, I had
Yeah.
one other question.
Please, Hannah.
In addition to the anecdotal examples that you heard today, would the town council want like a survey done in the community? Like maybe somebody who's willing to take the initiative to like go out into communities and tally up how many people who are living in neighborhoods where there are rentals, how they feel about that, just so that there's numbers to back up, what we're saying today.
So your question, Hannah, is town council open for a survey? Would that help them inform and make their decision?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for summing it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I make one more comment?
Yes, Edwin.
About investor-owned STRs in residential neighborhoods, non-hosted investor-owned short-term rental operations. I recommend some sunsetting be done. I use the term sunset instead of grandfathering, since the ordinance is not going to allow them in neighborhoods. They should be given 90 days or 6 months notice, a sunset type of, my recommendation is sunsetting, not grandfathering.
Thank you for that clarification. Others. And again, I want to emphasize that this is not the last time you can get input. If this somehow you're sleeping at night and this pops in your head, oh, I wish I would have said, please contact Anya. She's going to be gathering all these thoughts. She and other staff are going to gather these thoughts, make sure it's posted on the website. And so this is not the last time. And as she had indicated in the timeline, it's going to be going to the Planning Commission. There's other stages in this process. So make sure that you share with us what your thoughts and questions might be.
We have a few minutes left in our meeting. I've been looking to see, some of you are just listening, I guess, but if there is anyone who hasn't spoken yet, who's been listening and now has some thoughts about the draft ordinance that you'd like to share, the floor is open.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Marie.
Oh, sorry, I just cut somebody off, I think.
Well, go ahead. You've got the
I was
floor.
just gonna say that I feel like this is really complicated because hotels, I feel, are trying to influence this. And it's not fair to homeowners and property owners that really work hard to bring cool people to the community, give money back to our community, provide an enjoyable experience. I think, it's difficult because if we're talking about doing surveys, that anybody could say, sorry, I don't want a neighbor that has a screaming child, or I don't want a neighbor that, whatever. But we've lived next to college party houses. I feel like a lot of these Airbnbs just aren't that. And the town, I hope, recognizes that.
Thank you for your thoughts, Marie. Was there somebody else that was starting to speak?
No, it's okay.
I have a final comment, and that
Okay.
is this concern about investors flocking into town to buy up properties. My B&B operations are not profitable. We struggle to keep a positive cash flow. I think the reason why there's any influx of investors is they can get low interest mortgages, a lot of financing, and they're in it for the long-term gain. They're looking for capital appreciation. Now, I don't know what relevance that has to our discussions, but the fact is that Airbnb is not a gold mine. It is something that takes keeping the properties up, and it is something that allows homeowners to pay the taxes, and it's but they're not saving up for trips around the world.
Thank you, Bibb. Anybody else with some closing thoughts before we staff let you know what the next steps are? And
Sorry, I just add that one other thing. I want to agree with what Bibb said. I really enjoyed living in Orange County, and I know that I could never afford it on my own. So I'm really thankful that I've been here for 7 years and had opportunity to pay to go to school through the Airbnb and just pay for my property taxes and live in a community that I enjoy. And I would not have that opportunity if I couldn't do these short-term rentals. So that's just my scenario.
Yeah, and the second, what Hannah just said, same for me. That was my ticket to homeownership. It would not have been possible without Airbnb, period. And now that I'm no longer in the community, I like to, make my rental available for people who want to be in town for good reasons, for short term, and that's the best way to do it. So I've had 100% of any complaints against my renters and my property have been with long-term tenant, and 0% have been with Airbnb or short-term rental tenants. So I think this idea that there's some boogeyman party house type deal is just not, it's not real. It's not real. It's not the case.
Thirded what Jeremy and Hannah are saying. And further, there's just this idea that short-term rentals should be handled differently and more restricted than other types of rentals in town. And that is just against the facts of the issue of the types of incidents that are happening around town. You're running an issue of creating regulations that you're not going to be able to enforce, but the things in the ordinance that are enforceable and creating licenses and making sure that things are safe and that there's common sense restrictions for rentals, the same that there are for other properties, that stuff makes sense. But separating STRs and preventing things at STRs that are already an issue of other types of rentals just doesn't make any sense at all.
thank you. Catherine, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
I did, and I forgot this was my question. So you guys, I'm kind of late to the game. I just logged on after I got some emails because I've had an Airbnb for a few years, but what website specifically should I check?
Anya or Judy, you want to speak to that?
Yes, we can
For
put
updates?
the short-term rental project webpage in the chat. Give me 2 seconds to find it.
Okay, so Anya's
I
going
may
to
have
be
gotten
posting
it. I may have gotten it through an email because I just got the email that told me about this. But I applaud all these efforts and really appreciate, Hannah and Jeremy. I agree with so much of what you guys have said, and I've supplied housing to really wonderful traveling nurses who have helped our community so much. So, it's not a one size fits all thing, as you guys know.
Catherine, Anya has just posted in the link in the web in the chat section.
And
Okay, thank you.
have a question. There were some questions in the chat about definitions of various things. Is that on the project website? Is draft ordinance on there, or will it be on there?
Yes, if you go to the project website, the draft ordinance is up on there, as well as the short-term summary handout that we prepared specifically for this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's where you can go to find more information about the actual wording of the ordinance. Some of the questions were related to definitions or percentages of occupancy and that kind of thing. And some of those answers are proposed. Some of those things are proposed in that draft ordinance.
Has everybody who wanted to have a voice this evening, everyone who's had a question, been able to speak? I want to make sure we don't lose that opportunity. Again, you can always reach us through reaching out to Anya or one of the planning department employees. They can help you with this. making sure your questions are answered or posted, but want to make sure if there's anybody here tonight that hasn't had a chance to speak. Thank you. I want to thank folks. We've got another 5 minutes. I want to thank folks for being here this evening and continuing. I know some of you have been here all along from the get-go when this first was voiced in the community. And thank you for your perseverance and consistency in trying to help us understand from your perspective. What I realize is I see clearly from where I sit, but I don't sit in every seat in the House. And so thank you for bringing your views to the table. We'll continue to work at this. Anya, is there anything we want to do to let folks know next steps?
Sure, let me share this so that you all have the right contact information here. So before the end of the week, we will post the recording of this meeting online. So if you feel the need to rewatch it, you can, or share it with others who weren't able to attend. Like Jim said, we are collecting all the questions that you've provided during this meeting, and we will post a question and answer online with our responses. And then for those of you who have additional questions that you want addressed, if you could get those to me by tomorrow morning or so, and my email address is agran@townofchapelhill.org. So agrahn@townofchapelhill.org, and it's also in the chat. And then our next steps will be to go to Planning Commission and then Town Council.
Remind us when that when it goes to the Planning Commission and when it goes to Council.
So no problem. The Planning Commission date is Tuesday, May 4th, and then the Council public hearing is tentatively scheduled for May 19th. And we will continue to keep you all posted via email and on the town calendar page, as well as on the short-term rental project page.
And folks are welcome to come to Planning Commission meetings, are they? Or how do they speak into that process? And how would a person speak into a council when it comes to council, Anya?
So in both cases, both at the public or at the Planning Commission meeting, as well as the council public hearing, they will take public comment. And so I can't speak exactly for Planning Commission, but I believe they'll use a similar feature on Zoom with the raise your hand button, and we'll bring you into the meeting so that you can provide your public comment. And I believe we do the same thing at council.
And remind folks that if you've got something lengthy that you want the Planning Commission, the council staff to think about and include, make sure you send it so that we can we don't lose it in translation. Well, again, I want to thank you for being here, helping us to put a voice and a face to this. This is complex. This is really, if it were easy, it would have been done long before now, and we would have had greater clarity on it. And we want to get this right, and y'all are helping very much. So thank you very much for choosing to be here this evening. And reach out to Anya if you've got something that comes up after this.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all
you
for your
very
hard
much.
work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.